Dehumanization is never accidental. It's a tactic. It starts small, with language that strips away individuality. A name becomes a label. A person becomes a thing. Once that shift happens, control gets easier. You don't feel guilt when you're not dealing with a full human being. You feel justified. That's how systems of power work, whether they're loud and violent or quiet and polite. The goal is the same. Reduce someone until resistance feels unreasonable. For Black women and girls, this has a long, ugly history. Their pain is minimized. Their strength is exaggerated in a way that removes their right to vulnerability. They're expected to endure more, react less, and stay composed no matter what's done to them. When they do speak up, they're called aggressive. When they stay quiet, they're called weak. Either way, the box stays locked. Dehumanization thrives on these contradictions because confusion keeps people off balance. Control also feeds on spectacle. When harm is made public, it sends a message to everyone watching. This is what happens when you step out of line. The crowd becomes part of the system, even if they don't touch a single thing. Laughter, phones held up, silence. All of it reinforces the idea that the person at the center is there for consumption, not empathy. Once someone is treated like entertainment, their dignity becomes optional. Another layer of dehumanization is choice removal. Being forced into situations you didn't consent to, especially confrontational ones, is about breaking autonomy. It tells the person, your body is not yours. Your safety is not a priority. Your refusal doesn't matter. That kind of control isn't just physical. It gets into the mind. It trains people to hesitate before trusting their own instincts, because those instincts have been punished before. What makes dehumanization effective is how ordinary it can look from the outside. It doesn't always come with chains or uniforms. Sometimes it shows up as peer pressure, authority figures abusing influence, or social norms that excuse cruelty. People say things like that's just how it is, or she should be able to handle it. Those statements sound neutral, but they carry weight. They normalize harm and make resistance feel like overreaction. There's also a dangerous myth that dehumanization only works on the weak. That if someone is strong, trained, educated, or disciplined, it won't affect them. That's not true. Dehumanization isn't about physical strength. It's about context. It's about being surrounded, outnumbered, and denied basic respect. Even the most capable person feels the pressure of being treated as less than human. The difference is what they do with that pressure. Control depends on predictability. The system expects fear, freezing, or collapse. It expects compliance. When someone refuses to perform that role, it disrupts the entire structure. That's why moments of resistance feel so shocking. Not because resistance is rare, but because it's been edited out of the story so often. We're taught to expect silence, not skill. Submission, not strategy. Dehumanization also isolates. It convinces the person targeted that no one will believe them, stand with them, or care enough to intervene. Isolation makes control efficient. If you think you're alone, you negotiate with your own boundaries. You accept things you shouldn't have to accept. That's why reclaiming humanity often starts internally, with a decision that says I see myself, even if no one else does right now. The most unsettling thing about dehumanization is how quickly it can flip. The moment control is challenged, the narrative changes. The same people who treated someone as disposable suddenly see them as a threat. Not because the person changed, but because the illusion broke. Humanity returned, and with it, agency, capability, and unpredictability. Systems built on control don't know how to function when the person they diminished refuses to stay small. Forced conflict is a tool designed to create loss no matter what choice is made. When someone is pushed into a fight they didn't choose, the goal isn't fairness or resolution. The goal is damage. If they refuse, they're mocked, punished, or labeled cowardly. If they comply, they're blamed for whatever happens next. The trap is built so that dignity is the first thing taken away, long before anything physical happens. Public cruelty amplifies that effect. When pressure is applied in front of an audience, it adds a layer of humiliation that private abuse doesn't need. The eyes watching become part of the force. Each stare, laugh, or recording phone tightens the situation. The person being targeted isn't just defending themselves anymore. They're managing how they'll be remembered, judged, or replayed. The moment stops being about survival and turns into performance under threat. There's a reason this kind of cruelty is staged. It creates a narrative for observers. Someone has to be framed as the aggressor, the problem, the spectacle. When a black girl is forced into that role, stereotypes do most of the work. People expect chaos from her, violence from her, loss of control from her. That expectation makes any response she gives feel pre-approved. Even restraint can be twisted into something suspicious. Forced conflict also scrambles the body's natural responses. Adrenaline spikes, time feels distorted, and decision-making narrows. That's not weakness. That's biology. But cruelty depends on pretending those reactions are character flaws. If someone stumbles, they're clumsy. If they hesitate, they're guilty. The environment is engineered to provoke a reaction and then punish it. What makes public cruelty especially effective is how quickly accountability disappears. When harm is shared, responsibility becomes diluted. No single person feels fully at fault. Everyone tells themselves they were just watching, just following along, just reacting. This diffusion protects the system and leaves the targeted person carrying the full weight of the moment alone. There's also a power imbalance baked into forced conflict. One side usually controls the space, the rules, and the timing. The other is expected to react instantly, perfectly, and without error. That's not a fair contest. It's an ambush. The cruelty lies not just in the physical risk, but in the impossible standards imposed afterward. Public cruelty trains people to self-censor. After watching someone get humiliated or hurt, others learn what not to do. They stay quieter. They stay smaller. They avoid attention. That's the ripple effect. One forced conflict becomes a warning broadcast to everyone else. Control spreads without needing to be repeated. For the person inside the conflict, there's often a strange clarity mixed with fear. Everything unnecessary falls away. The body focuses. The mind scans for exits, threats, and opportunities. This isn't the chaos people expect. It's focus under pressure. But society often refuses to recognize that clarity is skill, especially when it comes from someone they've already decided is inferior. Cruelty depends on predictability. It assumes panic, collapse, or explosive emotion. When the response doesn't match that script, it unsettles the people who set the trap. Calm becomes threatening. Precision becomes suspicious. Control shifts not because the cruelty ends, but because it stops working the way it was supposed to. Forced conflict also reveals who benefits from disorder. The people who push others into fights rarely step into the consequences themselves. They watch from the edges, protected by authority, numbers, or social cover. The risk is outsourced. The harm is centralized. That imbalance is what keeps the cycle repeating. Public cruelty survives because it's often mislabeled as discipline, entertainment, or justice. Those labels make violence easier to swallow. They give cruelty a costume. Once stripped of that disguise, what remains is exposure, coercion, and the calculated use of fear to maintain dominance in a space where one person was never meant to win, only to endure, react, and be reshaped by a moment that was never about conflict at all. Silence is often read as consent when it's really calculation. When someone doesn't react the way others expect, people rush to fill in the gaps with assumptions. They assume fear, submission, or inability. They rarely consider restraint. Silence becomes a blank screen where stereotypes get projected. For black girls especially, that projection is heavy. If she's quiet, she must be broken. If she's still, she must be defeated. That misreading is convenient for anyone who wants to stay in control. Silence can be a survival strategy. In hostile environments, reacting too quickly can escalate danger. Every word, every movement is judged, recorded, or twisted. Staying quiet can mean staying alive, staying unhurt, or staying out of a narrative that's already written to punish any response. But those outside the moment often don't respect that complexity. They prefer noise. They prefer spectacle. Quiet makes them uncomfortable because it denies them emotional access. There's a long history of equating loudness with power and calm with weakness. That logic ignores how many people have been trained to stay composed under pressure. It also ignores how often silence is enforced. When people are punished for speaking up, they learn to choose their moments carefully. That learning gets mislabeled as passivity. The system then uses that label to justify further pressure. Silence also disrupts expectations. People who rely on dominance often want immediate feedback. They want flinching, arguing, or pleading. Those reactions confirm their power. When none of that happens, they feel unsettled. They push harder, not because the silence proves weakness, but because it threatens their sense of control. The quiet becomes a challenge simply by existing. For Black women and girls, silence is often demanded and punished at the same time. They're told to stay in their place, not to speak out of turn, not to make others uncomfortable. But when they comply, they're accused of lacking confidence or presence. This double bind ensures there's no safe response. Silence becomes another tool used against them, regardless of why it was chosen. There's also the assumption that strength must be visible at all times. That if someone is capable, they should display it immediately. That expectation ignores discipline. Many forms of training emphasize patience, observation, and timing. Knowing when not to act is as important as knowing how. But those skills aren't always legible to outsiders, especially when they don't expect competence in the first place. Silence gives space to assess. It allows the mind to map the room, read body language, and anticipate movement. It's not empty. It's active. But because it doesn't look dramatic, it's dismissed. People mistake a lack of outward reaction for a lack of internal readiness. That mistake can be costly. When silence is mistaken for weakness, it invites escalation. People push boundaries further, assuming there will be no consequences. They feel safe taking more, saying more, doing more. That's often the moment when the miscalculation becomes clear. The quiet wasn't absence. It was containment. There's a cultural discomfort with controlled emotion, especially when it comes from someone already marginalized. Calm is interpreted as coldness. Focus is interpreted as detachment. Neither fits the narrow roles assigned. So silence gets reframed as deficiency instead of discipline. That reframing protects the ego of those who underestimate it. Silence also protects something private. Not every reaction needs to be shared. Not every thought needs to be visible. Holding that line can be an act of self-respect in environments that feel entitled to your pain. Choosing not to perform emotion denies others the satisfaction of consumption. That denial is often misread as emptiness when it's actually boundary. The danger of underestimating silence is that it blinds people to what's coming next. They assume the story is already over. They assume they've won. That assumption is based on noise, not reality. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits, watches, and chooses its moment with care, precision, and a refusal to waste energy on proving anything to people who never intended to see it anyway. Chaos looks loud from the outside. It's fast, messy, unpredictable. People associate it with power because it overwhelms the senses. Shouting, rushing, crowd noise, sudden movement. It creates the illusion that whoever causes the most disruption is in control. But chaos burns energy quickly. It depends on panic, impulse, and reaction. Training is the opposite. It's quiet. It's repetitive. It's built in rooms with no audience, no adrenaline, and no applause. That difference matters when pressure hits. Training prepares the body and mind to function when things stop making sense. It teaches responses that don't rely on emotion. When chaos erupts, the untrained person reacts to what feels biggest in the moment. The trained person reacts to what actually matters. Distance, balance, timing, breathing, awareness. These aren't instincts. They're habits installed over time. That's why training doesn't disappear under stress. It activates. Chaos wants immediacy. It pushes for now, now, now. Training understands delay. A fraction of a second can change an outcome. Waiting isn't hesitation. It's selection. Choosing the right moment instead of the loudest one. To someone watching, that pause can look like fear. In reality, it's control asserting itself internally before it shows externally. Crowds amplify chaos. Energy feeds off itself. One movement sparks another. Noise escalates. People lose individual responsibility and merge into reaction. Training isolates focus. It narrows attention instead of widening it. While chaos spreads outward, training pulls inward. The trained person is aware of the crowd without being swallowed by it. That separation creates space where decisions can still be made. There's a misconception that chaos equals freedom, that letting go means being powerful. But chaos follows patterns too, predictable ones. Panic causes people to rush forward, pull back, or freeze. Anger causes overextension. Fear causes retreat. These patterns repeat across situations. Training exploits that predictability. It doesn't need to overpower chaos. It needs to outlast and outthink it. Training also reshapes the relationship with pain and fear. It doesn't remove them. It contextualizes them. Discomfort becomes information instead of emergency. Fear becomes a signal, not a command. Chaos treats fear like fuel. Training treats it like data. That difference determines whether someone gets pulled under or stays oriented when things go wrong. Another gap between training and chaos is ego. Chaos is driven by it. Proving something. Dominating. Showing force. Training minimizes ego because ego interferes with precision. Overconfidence creates openings. Emotional attachment to outcome creates mistakes. Training emphasizes function over feeling. Do what works. Discard what doesn't. That mindset can look cold to outsiders who expect visible emotion. Training also removes the need for improvisation under pressure. What looks like instinct is usually repetition layered so deeply it feels automatic. The body moves before the mind argues. That speed isn't rushed. It's efficient. Chaos rushes because it doesn't know what comes next. Training moves decisively because it does. When chaos meets training, the imbalance becomes clear quickly. Chaos escalates. Training stabilizes. Chaos gets louder. Training gets quieter. That contrast unnerves people who rely on intimidation. They expect flinching, shouting, erratic movement. Calm throws them off. Precision feels unnatural in a moment designed to be messy. Training doesn't guarantee safety. It doesn't promise victory. What it does is preserve agency. Even in situations designed to strip control, training creates options. It keeps the mind from collapsing into reaction. That alone can shift the balance. Chaos wants to trap people in the moment. Training allows them to operate within it. There's also a moral misunderstanding around training. People assume it's about violence. Often, it's about restraint. Knowing how much force not to use. Knowing when to disengage. Knowing how to end something quickly instead of prolonging it. Chaos prolongs harm because it feeds on escalation. Training seeks resolution, even when the environment is hostile. The most unsettling thing about training is how invisible it can be until it's needed. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It waits. When chaos finally collides with it, the reaction is often disbelief. Not because chaos was underestimated, but because training was never considered a factor at all. Power doesn't usually disappear all at once. It shifts, quietly at first, almost unnoticed. One moment, control feels absolute. The next, something is off. A reaction doesn't land the way it was supposed to. A response breaks the expected rhythm. The people who thought they were directing the situation feel a pause they didn't plan for. That pause is where power begins to move. The flip often starts internally. Before anything visible changes, there's a decision. A recalibration. The person who was being pressured stops reacting and starts choosing. That internal shift matters more than any external display. It changes posture, breath, focus. Even without movement, it alters the energy in the space. People sense it before they understand it. Power depends heavily on narrative. Who's in charge? Who's allowed to act? Who's supposed to submit? When someone steps out of their assigned role, even slightly, the narrative stutters. The crowd hesitates. Authority feels less certain. The script no longer matches the behavior. That mismatch creates confusion, and confusion weakens control. The flip doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. A steady gaze instead of looking away. A grounded stance instead of shrinking. A refusal to rush. These small choices signal something important. They say this person is no longer operating under the same rules. That signal spreads quickly, especially to those who were relying on fear to maintain dominance. There's also a timing element. Power flips when expectations are violated at the right moment. Too early, and it gets crushed. Too late, and the damage is already done. That timing often comes from awareness rather than aggression. Reading the room. Noticing who's watching, who's wavering, who's invested. Power isn't just held by individuals. It's held by perception. When the flip happens, the people who assumed control often reveal insecurity. They get louder, more erratic. They overcorrect. That behavior exposes what was hidden before. Control that was supposed to feel natural starts to look forced. Authority that relied on silence now demands obedience. The mask slips. For the person experiencing the flip, there's often a strange calm. Not relief, but clarity. The fear doesn't vanish, but it stops driving every decision. Focus sharpens. Options appear that weren't visible before. The body feels heavier, more rooted. That groundedness changes how others interact, even if they don't consciously register it. The moment power flips, responsibility shifts too. The person who was being acted upon becomes an active participant. That doesn't mean dominance changes hands completely. It means agency returns. And agency is dangerous to systems built on compliance. Once someone demonstrates they can choose, the illusion of total control is broken. Power flips are often misinterpreted after the fact. Observers rewrite the story to make it seem inevitable. They say things like it was obvious, or she was always strong. That revision erases the risk involved in the moment itself. At the time, the outcome was not guaranteed. The flip required presence, discipline, and the willingness to act without validation. There's also backlash. Power doesn't concede gracefully. When it feels threatened, it tries to reassert itself through punishment, shaming, or reframing. The person who disrupted the balance may be labeled difficult, dangerous, or unstable. Those labels are attempts to reclaim narrative control after physical or psychological control has slipped. What makes the flip enduring is not the action itself, but what follows. Once power has been challenged successfully, it's harder to pretend it was never vulnerable. Even if the situation resets, something has changed. People remember. The space remembers. Future interactions carry that residue. The flip also reshapes self-perception. The person who experienced it now has evidence. Not theoretical confidence, but lived proof. That proof doesn't need to be announced. It settles into posture, boundaries, and decision-making. It changes what feels possible next time pressure shows up. Power flipping isn't about becoming dominant. It's about refusing to remain diminished. It's about interrupting a pattern long enough to create a different outcome. The moment itself may be brief, but its effects stretch forward, altering trajectories, expectations, and the quiet calculations people make when deciding who they think they can control. Reclaiming identity starts with refusing the version of yourself that was handed to you by force. When someone has been reduced, labeled, or controlled, that imposed identity can feel heavy, sticky, hard to peel off. It's repeated by others often enough that it starts to sound familiar. The danger is not just that people believe it, but that the person targeted might start negotiating with it, adjusting themselves to fit a shape they never chose. Action interrupts that process. Not symbolic action, not statements or explanations. Real movement that contradicts the narrative. When someone acts in a way that doesn't align with how they've been defined, it creates friction. That friction is uncomfortable for everyone involved. It exposes how shallow the imposed identity was to begin with. Identity under control is passive. It's assigned. You are this. You belong here. You act like that. Reclaiming it requires agency. Doing instead of being told. Choosing instead of reacting. Action makes identity tangible again. It moves it out of abstraction and into the body. You don't argue your way back into yourself. You move your way back. For people who have been dehumanized, action is often the first language that gets respected. Words get dismissed. Emotions get minimized. Explanations get twisted. But action forces acknowledgement. It doesn't ask permission to exist. It simply does. That's why reclaiming identity through action can feel dangerous. It breaks an unspoken agreement that says stay in your place and we won't escalate. There's also risk in visibility. When someone steps into action, they're seen differently, not always positively. Reclaiming identity doesn't guarantee approval. It often attracts scrutiny. People look harder. They question motives. They search for flaws. That scrutiny is part of the cost, but it's also proof that the action mattered. Invisible people aren't examined. Visible ones are. Action also collapses distance between who someone is and who they know themselves to be. Under control, there's often a split. An internal self that knows the truth and an external self that performs safety. Action closes that gap. Even briefly, it aligns the inside and the outside. That alignment is grounding. It reminds the person that they are still whole. Reclaiming identity isn't about dominance or proving superiority. It's about authorship. Who gets to define what this body can do, what this mind can handle, what this person represents? Action answers that question without debate. It says this is mine. My timing. My response. My choice. There's often a misconception that reclaiming identity must look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's precise. Sometimes it's restrained. Sometimes it's a single decision made under pressure that no one else fully understands. The scale doesn't matter. The ownership does. Even small actions can carry weight when they're taken from a place of agency. Action also rewrites memory. Moments of powerlessness tend to replay. They loop. Action interrupts that loop. It creates a different reference point, not erasing what happened, but standing next to it. Over time, that new memory changes how the old one is held. It shifts from defining to contextual. Reclaiming identity through action doesn't require an audience, but it often creates one. People notice when someone no longer fits the role assigned to them. That notice can be uncomfortable. It can provoke resistance, but it also changes how future interactions unfold. Boundaries become clearer. Assumptions become riskier. There's a physical component to this reclamation. The body remembers being controlled. It holds tension, hesitation, readiness. Action releases some of that stored instruction. It tells the body it's allowed to respond again. That permission is powerful. It restores trust between mind and muscle. Identity reclaimed through action is harder to take away because it's lived, not imagined. It doesn't rely on validation. It's reinforced every time the person chooses themselves again. That repetition builds something stable, not invincibility, but continuity. What often unsettles observers is how ordinary reclaimed identity can look. No speech, no announcement, just someone operating from a place that wasn't accessible to them before. That ordinariness is deceptive. It's the result of something fundamental shifting beneath the surface, where control once sat and no longer fully fits.